Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime's webinar all about vehicle equipment standardisation. We are recording this and we'll share a link to it with you later, so you can share it with colleagues that can't join us live. We are more than happy to have questions during the presentations. If you put them in the chat, then we can pick them up afterwards, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So this is one of the series of online events that we're having on Future Bus, looking at connected and automated vehicles, what needs to go on the street and what goes in them. That originally was forming part of the face-to-face event that we had to cancel because of the election. So this one, we're looking at vehicle equipment standardisation. We have got IT4PT with us this lunchtime. We've got David Glendenning from there, who's going to talk to us about what they're up to and their future plans. And then I will finish off with a little bit on the SEND standardisation programme, which turns the work of IT4PT and RTIG and other organisations into formal international standards. So the bulk of today will be with David, who I would like to welcome to the screen. Welcome, David, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, it's a great pleasure, actually. Yeah, just for those who aren't familiar with IT4PT, I'll do a short introduction. It's a non-profit member organisation. It's an association constituted in Brussels, and it's open to all companies and organisations with an interest in developing public transport into the most efficient, sustainable and attractive means of travel. This is one of the aspirations that I think we probably all share to some extent. And our members are a mix of authorities, public transport authorities and operators, and industry suppliers from all over the world. The association's governance is shared between those different elements of the public transport world. And here's a little boasting screen. These are some of our members. Yeah, I won't dwell too. There's plenty of familiar sorts of logos up here. I'll get me laser pointer. There's TfL, of course, and all sorts of folk. To some extent, because the membership is layered. Those members are both principal members and strategic members. Strategic members sit on the board and so guide IT4PT's direction of travel. But there are quite a large number of associate members, and at the moment we're dealing with some very interesting applications for associate membership from China and places who seem to think that the IT4PT label is sort of like a CE mark, which of course it's not quite. So just to have a look at how we work, our aims really are to consult with our members and others. This is completely public transport domain wide, our sources of input. And we also participate in standards activities of various sorts. And we, from that quite wide source of input, we work on developing functional requirements. And there are pre-studies that are run first, which both members and non-members can participate in. And then members can get involved in actually evolving the requirements for via the requirements working groups. When that is ready and has been approved for going further, it'll be referred to a technical working group. And this is part of the technical committee. We contribute to projects and standards with some of our experts, both, well, from the team, the IT4P team, and also from member organisations. And the point of those technical working groups is to deliver technical specs. And they are made available for free. All you have to do is confess who you are on the IT4PT website, and you can access the specifications. Implementing the specifications, of course, is something else. And we have the mechanism of issuing a compliance label to actually verify that you comply, your product or your vehicle or your IT system complies in relevant respects to the specifications. And we offer that testing, we offer as a laboratory activity, which is something I'll end the presentation by mentioning. So what's a standard? Well, this is quite an interesting question. We've got two main understandings of what a standard is. And the first is what I've called legislative. So there are regulatory regimes which are broader laws governing privacy, accessibility, and so on and so on. There are the delegated regulations, such as MMTIS, which are very important. And there are also governmental and regional aspirations. So that the environment is one good example of this. Another is the recently passed Data Act in the EU, which has very interesting things to say about the ownership of data and how data can be used to facilitate innovation rather than to protect against it. So it's quite an interesting thing. Then, of course, there's the technical standards, which Tim will mention. There's things like Transmodel, NetX and Siri, and of course TS 13149. Then there are local regulations, which are laid down by public transport authorities and road traffic authorities and so on. They have to be taken into account. And there's also included what I've called brute force standards. There are some standards that happen to exist. They're not actually legislative, but most people I talk to actually treat them as if they were legislative, because the people who've imposed them over historical time have such force that basically nobody wants to take them on. I've got some very, very large IT suppliers, for example, in mind, but I'm not mentioning any names there. Then there's the other understanding of standardization, which is kind of what's it for? And I've called this the practical understanding. And it's making sure that standardization is a means of making it easier for all participants in the public transport market to join the party with a minimum of effort and fuss. And that, I believe, is one of the really important aspects of that IT4PT are taking note of. So our primary goal is to promote interoperability throughout the domain. And of course, in that context, the type 1 understanding of standards, we've got to use them because there they are. But the problem with the type 1 standards is that they have, although almost all of them were developed with the idea that they were serving type 2 aspirations, silos still persist. And these can be technical or commercial or national. And public transport is a complex and sometimes arthritic domain. So we find ourselves in the uncomfortable position of having to adapt quite quickly to change, but none of us being quite willing to get rid of our Zimmer frames. And so one important IT for PT function is to form a bridge between silos. And as you've seen, that the way we work is designed very much to make that possible. So here's a landscape. So yeah, I mean, just to mention that the prime focus for any analysis that's wanting to talk about interoperability, it's interfaces that are the important thing. And if we look at how all of this is taking place under the SEN and transmodel umbrella, but here we have the way it starts out and the way it becomes broader and broader. And this is a picture of the domain. And the various interfaces that have been dealt with have been kind of color coded here in terms of arrows. I think there's one or two arrows missing in this one, but you can see there's the standards that are particularly important, the OJP, NetX Siri, transmodel type standards. And then there's other ones which are kind of more proprietary, especially when we're talking about on vehicle to ground communications and so on, and passenger information in the not on board sense. But many of these are now being worked on quite seriously by the standards organization. They're trying to bring them together to some degree. So where IT for PT began was in this position. We began producing specs, and at the moment all our specs are centered really, when it comes down to it, around thermal engine buses. So we're embarking on this trajectory towards multi-fuel, multimodal, fully integrated, multinational systems. And this, what I'm going to talk about, is our plan for doing that. So for what we call the service-oriented architecture, that's what SOA stands for, we have our set of specifications, as I say, publicly available, freely available, which detail the services that you can interface with. And the base information of how your various applications, real world applications, could do that is via an inventory. However, neat though that looks, when it comes to actual runtime, what you get is this. And so we moved very successfully on the service-oriented architecture basis. We moved very successfully from a free-for-all to something much more universally accessible. But still, there are problems, and there are problems which actually impact the way in which we see, I think everybody sees the whole market moving. So the benefits of the service-oriented architecture were that discovery, which is how to access the inventory, uses standard local network methods, as a DNSSD or MDNS, depending on how you like to say it. And there's a minimal need for pre-configuration. There's a consistent data set because each specification actually says, well, this service produces this data in this format. And it's relatively easy to test a service that's been submitted against the specifications for labeling. But against that, there's the fact that DNSSD is really not secure. It's a local protocol. It's designed not to be secure, actually. And although there are some technical suggestions around, then they're none of them particularly wonderful. Then against the need for pre-configuration, you've got the fact that you've got to have a connection per item. All your applications have to be connected individually to each of the services that it needs to access. And so there's the maintenance of multiple different types of connection. Then you've got, against the consistent data set, you've got the fact that those data sets are sometimes quite heavyweight. I mean, in some instances, like the time service, it's nothing. It's just the time service. But in things like AVMS and so on, you've got quite a heavyweight data structure. And although it's possible to because of the prescriptive nature of the service definition, you can test it nicely. These definitions turn out to be quite rigid in that if your application's only interested in a tiny little bit of it, it still has to digest the whole thing and make sense of it to some extent. And it's sometimes tricky for data consumers to extract the relevant data because it may not be offered in the form that they would like to use it. So data provided, talking in kind of software engineering terms, if you like, data providers and consumers are quite tightly coupled at the implementation level. And all the dependencies must be known in advance, which restricts the flexibility of things. And enhancements are expensive to implement. And when they are implemented, they often break the standards. So you get people doing some weird and wonderful things, interpreting data items in a slightly strange way because they'd like to. So all of that amounts to how do we deal with change? And I'm going to divide this into three sorts of angle that we approach this from. We recognize, because as I mentioned right at the top, we have a process, and our process has needed some attention because simply the volume of labeling requests we're getting means that we've had to vastly increase our capacity to carry out automated testing. And we also noticed from experience with a slightly simpler process that we would sometimes reach the end without being entirely sure that what we'd verified in theory was actually achievable in practice. So this is not applied quite so much to the existing standards that we've supplied, but it has applied where we've tried to take any new needs into account, especially things like cybersecurity and enhanced passenger information and that kind of thing. So we've revised the process a little. We've still got the progress from requirements to technical to the executive board giving the final release, and then we deploy the standards. But there's a little bit more discipline that we've put in place in the intervening parts. So it should be noted that this use case end of things is not restricted to members. As I mentioned first, there's pre-studies that anybody can participate in. Just have a look on the website and you'll see the announcement of them. So the second thing is that we thought we'd take stock of exactly why we're being asked to change. And of course, these are the major factors. There's the environmental factor, which is, having great impact on fuel usage and so on. We've got the multimodality aspect of public transport, and we've got tighter and more detailed integration, which seen as the thing that's really going to make the difference from the PTA PTO point of view. And of course, it wasn't really a matter that we got tasked with until people began making a really quite serious noise about it. And then, of course, we've got, as I mentioned, the noise. We've got members have been saying for a couple of years now, come on, we need to do things differently. So 2 levels of response, really. There's the tactical response, which is addressing our current set of specifications. And there's going to be a revision. At the moment, there's a thing called SO1, which is the installation requirements specification, which tells you, what kind of connectors you've got to use and what size your enclosures have to be, and maybe how they're fixed in your vehicle and so on. And that is all at the moment entirely restrained or constrained by the context of a thermal bus. And we definitely need to address that. And so there's a proposal to restructure by dividing that spec into various different vehicle and possibly regional variants. Then there's the update of the existing service-oriented specifications. There are 1 or 2 really quite excellent pieces of feedback that we've got from members, and we're definitely working on those. We've got an expected announcement of the final review and release of those in the autumn of this year. And of course, we're taking the lead on some of that from Transmodel 6.2, which is in the process, in the final process of being corrupted by Sen editors. Whoops. Validated by Sen editors and finally released. Then we've got the undertaking to make sure that we're maintaining, for this kind of activity, we're maintaining backward compatibility, and that's very important because we don't want to frighten people. So there are quite a few of the current services that will remain completely usable under the current regime. Then the next step is the strategic response, which is the evolution of a data-centric broker-based solution. And this has a number of things. It opens up the path between vehicles and back office. It improves the adaptability for onboard operations, and it's got huge benefits that we need to make sure aren't just theoretical. And we can also, help things like the security questions, because, well, I'll go into that in a couple of seconds. But of course, this degree of strategic response does mean that we're going to have to put some initial effort into it. And so the aim is to ease a gradual migration. So we must maintain some compatibility with the service-oriented architecture, but we also need to open the door in a useful and responsive way. So this is the picture for an average kind of broker-based approach. It's a very simplified thing, but it makes the point that you haven't got services here, you've got data items, data producers. So you've got something, and it doesn't matter what, is producing your vehicle location data. And you've got something talking about what distance the vehicle has traveled. And it doesn't have to be a particular type of thing that does that. All it has to do is publish its data in a particular agreed way, and then everybody can make use of it for whatever purpose they like. And of course, the broker can also contact the wide area network, and that opens up the onboard to back office pathway. So the potential security can be applied at two levels. There's the question of the configuration of the network on board, and we're working quite hard on that at the moment to try and get some really solid input. We've got some very interesting input coming from very current practitioners in the cybersecurity field. So we're hopeful of being able to produce some good standards relating to that. But then, of course, you've got the possibility of the MQTT broker itself implementing a particular type of security. We've actually standardized on MQTT version 5 for that reason, because it's much better than 3.11, which was the last serious contender here. So we got benefits versus downsides again. You've got the unified messaging system. You've got the access controls, which are, as I say, could be imposed on two levels. It allows simpler, better targeted data sets. And you've got decoupling from producers and consumers. It's very adaptable. It allows back office to onboard. Downsides: you've got to find a way of making the broker discoverable in the first place. And that is interesting. And also, by the naivest models that we've looked at, the broker is a possible single point of failure. And that's something that we really have to deal with quite swiftly. Also, data providers, there must be some way of authorizing data providers so that the MQTT and network systems can apply their security regimes. And most of the items where I've had actual practical experience of talking to people at all ends of the process don't want extra things to do to certify their product or their individual piece of equipment and so on. So there's some work to be done in that realm. So just to give you a summary of what we're working on at the moment, we've revisited the installation requirements revisions for multimodal purposes especially. We've got some electric vehicle and infrastructure data which is being revisited. There's the Tiger protocol, and there's part of SO1, the installation requirements. We've got a couple of quite large tables that we've found haven't been that well welcomed, as it were, by people actually working on them. So we're revising that. We've got a big requirements activity around power management and also vehicle location, because vehicle location, it's no longer even vaguely appropriate to just think, oh, well, we've got the GPS, or you've got a GPS and odometer, that's enough. We're at the technical working group stage with the active inventory service, which I'll talk very briefly about, cybersecurity, automatic vehicle monitoring system. This is AVMS version 2, and this is MQTT based. All of these, except for cybersecurity, are MQTT based. There's the log-on feature set. There's automatic passenger counting version 2, and there's the passenger information service. Those are technical working groups that are ongoing. the core of this is the active inventory service. So what is it? I see it as a machine-to-machine concierge service. So you've got to be able to ask it. Well, you've got to be able to tell it, who am I, and what can I do for you, or what I can do for you, and who are you, and what can you do for me? Yeah. So this is already covered by the DNSSD type service, but the rest is probably not. System configuration, how does it all fit together and how can everyone connect? Well, that's simple. How can everyone connect in one sense, but I want to be able to find who's got the data that I need. Yeah. And then there's the system integrity guarantor. So basically you're asking the hotel, does the menu correctly identify what's on my plate and can I digest it? You know, you're something may be announced, but it may not be delivered in the form that you expect and so on. So you need to be confident that that's the case. Then there's the question of system health monitoring. You've got to know that all the different parts are fitting together fine. You've got to be able to have confidence in the state of the system. And then for fleet and operational management purposes, you need to be able to have a degree of asset tracking, yeah, which is really quite an important aspect of monitoring your fleet. You've also got to be confident that data deployment is doing as you expect. So that's quite important. And then especially for remote monitoring, how do I get the data that I actually need? So the active inventory service imposes a structure. So there's the MQTT topic route, which could be a path to the vehicle from outside it, or it could be just a token inside a vehicle, for example. Then you've got the inventory section, which deals with configuration, the category configuration, updates, equipment, and providers. Now, providers this is where the section that defines what happens in the rest of the topics, this is where those topics are defined. This allows anybody registering, for example, as a piece of onboard equipment to say, oh, I'm this piece of equipment from this manufacturer, this and so on and so on, and I'm hosting this or that application. Then the application in this section would say, right, I'm this application and I'm going to publish on these topics. I'm going to publish my data on these topics. And we've even seen some instances where these fellas here can say, and if you want to be able to understand my data, which you may not be able to understand, from scratch, then you can look in the configuration section here, and you'll find out, for example, what data types to expect in the payloads that I'm delivering. So it's really quite flexible. A little bit intricate, certainly compared to the other way of doing it. But I think on the whole, the reception has been really quite positive. There are details that we need to sort out, and this is I'm working over the summer, and we'll resume activities in September when all those lucky Europeans get back from their holidays. So the idea is that your element, which may be a piece of equipment, or it may be a piece of software, or it may be a data update operation, has to register with the active inventory service. And it does that by identifying itself by what we call a scoped unique ID. And this is quite a sophisticated notion that's meant to get round the note that the fact that, for example, in various different NetX standards used throughout Europe will have actually different formats of ID that they use that are all kind of syntactically correct, but they just don't match up to one another. Yeah. And also you've got at the other end of the scale, you've got on board a vehicle, a piece of equipment wants to say who it is to the active inventory service, but it doesn't necessarily have the capacity to generate an actual UUID because its software may not be that wonderful. But it's still, there's something has to declare, oh, I'm a head sign here, or I'm an odometer. Yeah. And there's a way of doing that by declaring a type of ID with a scope. So you can say this ID will be unique in this vehicle. Yeah. Or this ID is unique for this operator. And that we found to be a very useful concept. So the registration, once it's done, the active inventory service keeps a log of things, but it's not responsible for publishing the actual elements' own details. All it does is say, okay, you can publish your details now. So all participants can actually discover what's going on direct from the horse's mouth. Yeah. So the final part of this that IT4PT is faced with is the different approach to the specifications, because especially if you think about the SO1, the installation requirements, we can't have this one document that is meant to deal unambiguously and clearly enough with all sorts of, ferries and electric vehicles and funicular railways and and all that. It really can't do that. So we have to revise the way those are presented, and we also will make sure that that the specification, especially the installation specifications, are covering physical standards only. At the moment, there's a little bit of ambiguity about there's this term module that applies to kind of not just a piece of equipment, but also to what it does. And of course, the truth is that nowadays a piece of equipment may do multiple things. So we're wanting to make that distinction clear so that we've got a nice clear line between physical compliance and functional compliance, if you like. So for onboard, this is for vehicles, physical only. Yeah. Then for onboard equipment, we have to bridge that gap. We have to say, okay, you've got physical standards and basic functionality if it means something, because hardware can host many feature sets. Then you've got the question of the feature sets themselves, which you could think of as just the software operations which are delivering specific functions. And the idea is that all the specified items will be fully testable and traceable, so that you absolutely know what you're being asked to implement, and you've got a great deal of confidence that if you implement what you do, you're going to get a label. Just taking the most complex of these, really, which is the feature sets question, what we'll really hinge the specifications on is topics and payloads. Yeah. So you've got certain topics that will that will be mandated to be accompanied by certain payloads. And you may define new topics, but as I mentioned before, you can, if you do that, you've got to declare them in the active inventory service. And of course, that the data sets have to be described really well to be usable. So we've got less emphasis on the implementation details of different feature sets, but the data has to be available and intelligible, and that's quite an interesting extra detail that will have to form part of the specifications. The implications for labelling, finally, are that, again, we're going to improve the process a bit. So our aims are that the application process will be easier and more precise. At the moment, you can go onto the ITxPT website and get a kind of form to fill in that says, oh, I'm a VCG, yeah, without actually mentioning that you're also a piece of equipment that does other work as well. So, you know, it's like, what are you being labelled for is the first thing that we have to make really clear. And then we're going to offer closer support during development and self-testing with what we're calling the Cloud Lab. Cloud Lab is a remotely hostable application. It's a container, it's a Docker container that people can actually install on their own network if they like. They can also access IT4PT's version of Cloud Lab, and that will mean that there'll be much smoother automation during laboratory testing, and the labels will be issued with greater granularity and precision. And going along with that, those people who are interested in forming tenders will be able to be much more precise about what they require in terms of IT4PT compliance. That's quite significant, I think, because at the moment, as I said, we're getting ideas that the IT4PT label is just a sort of carte blanche, that once you've got it, you can say you comply with just about anything. And that's not something we want to allow to persist. So thank you very much for your attention. As my final reminder here, if you're interested in pursuing any further information about or in relation to IT4PT, that's the address to head for. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David, for that very useful and informative update. We've been following the work that IT4PT have been doing for a good number of years, and you will, if you've been paying attention to some of the standards that ARTIG has done over the last few years, been referencing the connector standards and things like that that IT4PT have been using. There's quite a lot of close alignment and more alignment, particularly as they move towards more broker-based architectures. For example, the ARTIG content management system to display standard is MQTT based, and there's quite a lot of sharing that's going on there at the moment. So to follow on from what David's been talking about, I was going to just talk about the more formal, wider standards basis and how that's working. There are, as David said, a whole range of different standards bodies, starting off with organisations like ARTIG and in Germany VDV, that are local industry based, sort of veering on national organisations. But the formal organisation at a national level in the UK is BSI, what used to be called British Standards Institute. at a European level, it's SEN, and we talk a lot about SEN standards. And worldwide, I'm sure that you've come across ISO standards, and IT for PT sort of sits somewhere in that European, increasingly international, but less formal environment than the formal industry formal standards bodies. And the implication for that sits within the different types of standards that are involved. You've got company individual standards, which are very closed. You can find out what they are if you work within that organization or work with it, but not beyond that. And those are the sort of the bullied standards to an extent, to pick up on David's language. Then you've got industry bodies who, like ARTIG and IT for PT, try and make things a bit more open. If you're in the know, then you can get to find out about what's going on. If you're a member or you just follow the organisation, things are developed in cooperation with like-minded organisations. And then you start to move into the formal standardisation process with technical reports, the sort of exploratory, what's the state of the market, what might we need to be standardising, then technical standards, which are the way that lots of the public transport data standards start off. So, Siri and NetX, they start off as a technical standard, and then once they've been through the version 1, which always needs to change because it doesn't quite work, once you've been through a couple of iterations, you can start to make more formal. So technical standards are things that you can recommend people follow and adopt. But when you get to the next level up, ISO and EN standards in Europe, they're much stronger enforceable. They've been through a much more open and transparent process. They've been adopted in a few places and shaken down, and that they're going to work, and so you can say, you will do this. And it's these standards, the regulations and laws can reference and adopt for use. So a lot of the European regulations around multimodal travel, MMTIS and things like that, reference EN standards. And of course, being regulations, they're then mandatory. Specifically, from a public transport vehicle data standards perspective, there is a working group with the lovely name of TC278 Working Group 3 Subgroup 1, which historically has been about onboard data communication systems, very much a service orientated architecture, taking the work that IT for PT and VDV and ourselves have done over the years to turn those into technical standards for things like time and location. But in the same way that IT for PT are changing, that working group has recently been renamed, and it's now all about public transport vehicle data. Note, much more specific about data, and it's heading towards a much more data-centric architecture. Too early to say what sort of broker, but IT for PT play a very big role in it, as the VDV, and they're going down the MQTT route in the same way that ARTIG has, and that's going to very much focus on in-vehicle data and also the vehicle to back office. And so the work that we've done over the years in ARTIG on things like the over-air protocol will feed into the work of this group and eventually end up with European level enforceable standards. So if you're buying vehicles or working with operators, you can be much more specific. So that was a quick run through. I'm sure that you have some questions because David picked on quite a lot of things and raised a lot of things. So who's got some questions? No. It's a hot sunny day. You all want to get back to the deck chair. Eva.
Hi. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Eva Głowacka from KPMG, working on bots at the moment. Yeah, I do have two questions to David and yourself, team. One is about flexibility of registering declarations in AIS. What does it mean and how can we mitigate the risk of data quality on this? And the second thing is how quickly can we implement some of the vehicle information which the public and the industry desperately need for some time. So I will ask the first question. So recently we have been looking into electric vehicle platform for data, and the data has been standardized some time ago. It has multiple technology providers across the country, yet despite the standard, the data is of a very, very poor quality. So my worry over here is when you are saying it will be very flexible, how are we going to mitigate the risk that if, for example, someone is sending the information on which will be coming possibly from sensors and different type of equipment, for example, on the accessibility on the vehicle, whether the wheelchair is used or not, and whether a disabled person can jump in on the bus, or a mother with a buggy, or whether they should stay at home and wait until the next bus comes with that. So those type of information, or occupancy. We know that operators, first of all, they don't want to share it because of the commercial risk. Secondly, it's difficult to do it by the driver, who constantly needs to monitor how to do count people who are coming in and leaving the bus at the same time when they are driving. It's just impossible. So of course, again, occupancy, whether it is busy, semi-busy, free, etc. However, it is going to be defined. Another issue, emissions. I know we are moving towards electric vehicles, but still some time to go for everyone to get to the standard. So we will be using fossil fuels for the next few years. And although the vehicle numbers and the emissions can be calculated depending on the age, engine, etc., often the DVLA does not hold a very detailed records, very easily accessible, simply because they're being sent with paper or scanned over for hundreds of vehicles for a fleet, etc. And they rather have the fleet number rather than the vehicle number. So there's thousands of things which we know that industry needs, and we can provide. And there could be a broker, I don't know, whatever. How can we actually make this useful to everyone?
Very good point. At the moment, our approach has been to focus, as I said, on topic structures for particular, I've called them feature sets. Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily single applications. You can have a feature set that's made up of multiple applications. But it does, if you like, a feature set has to have a defined set of inputs and a defined set of outputs for a particular purpose. Yeah. And if I feel that if we are able to define a topic structure for that feature set that is at least a good core starting point, if you like, and then make those mandatory. And likewise, for each topic in that topic structure, we define really quite a strict set of data. And the sort of the promise of that is that then no matter what provider, if that provider carries an IT4PT or suitable labeling or certification, then anybody who's wanting to consume that data will know how to do that. There are some extremes in that, which I did touch on, where even though the data format can be well defined and so on, the actual data content could be of various flavors, if you like. And this lesson was drawn from what I mentioned, where various national access providers provide the correct XML format data, okay, but then the actual content of this data was a total mystery in some cases. You know, it's well, but this is the way we do our IDs. The thing about the active inventory service is it does allow you to, and indeed oblige you, where that's where that sort of mismatch is possible, to declare what type of IDs may be contained in each payload. So somebody coming with a different set of IDs that they have to map onto their own will know exactly how to do that mapping. So in a broader sense, your question is not solved yet. But it certainly is something we will have to consider. And in terms of how we do that, the most effective way is to get a really good broad set of input insights from people like yourself, you know.
Well, technology providers in particular, and data, I think. But no, absolutely. I mean, I'm only wearing the data management hat over here, really, based on the experience.
Yeah.
And,
you know, but I mean, it's a very important thing.
Yeah, and adoption is the real challenge here, particularly in the UK. Adoption is easier although it will become easier in the UK if you follow the Better Buses Act and the direction of travel for metropolitan areas. In a franchised environment where an operator is providing the equipment, the authorities providing the equipment, it's easier to move to this, and some European countries, particularly the Northern European ones, have been adopting this quite well. Larger groups in the UK are more likely to be adopting this before, the smaller operators, and it's going to take a good number of years to cascade down to the smaller operators in particular, because it's a whole ethos change and mindset about how you buy equipment, and rather than buying it in an isolated way, to think about that coordination and how do you get away from the fact that a bus has got 4 or 5 SIM cards in and things like that. So,
Yes.
you know, at the moment, you know, so there are benefits, but it's a case of persuading them, and that just takes time. Claudio.
Hello, thanks, Tim. Yeah, just a quick one. I see that time is almost over now. So I've understood that there's going to be a sort of differentiation between the standard, the IT4PT standard for electric vehicles compared to the thermal engine ones. So I would like to understand, as a manufacturer of displays, TFT screens, and with experience with VDV 301, which is very common in Germany, for example, but as well IT4PT, as we are also members. I would like to understand if this is going to affect only the power management part of the IT4PT, or if the communication protocol, which is probably the most attractive part that operators are looking at when integrating different devices.
Yes. Okay. So when you say you want to know whether this is going to affect, so the first thing is that the installation requirements will only affect the power management aspects of this. The second question really relies more on work that's going into the passenger information service working group, which is moving, but moving slowly because it is such a complex issue. We're starting at the display, or what we're calling the rendering device end of this. And we're aiming not to, well, to steer clear of such things as, you know, whether you should be sending streaming information via MQTT, which is an absolute no-no. You know, but for sophisticated displays, I think the question is pretty well solved in that they're most of them HTML capable, and that's so. There are certain standards that we can evolve that will affect how information is combined into what we're calling, pardon me, into what we're calling the renderer component, or the renderer layer, which is different to the collation layer that actually collects all the different stuff, the information about, you know, what templates to use or what triggers to use in passenger information contexts, and so on. So we're starting at the sharp end, and we're making some progress in that. One of the relevant areas will be that we will be asking display devices to declare their capabilities to the active inventory service. Yeah. So that's quite a full list of capabilities, because we're having to take into account, you know, some pretty restricted LED type displays, as well as the more capable displays, to let the renderer know what kind of thing it can ask the display to do. So we're thinking of using MQTT as a control and, if you like, data delivery mechanism. Yeah. But in terms of the actual real-time operation of a TFT display, we're not trying to touch that. That's far too you know, far too real-time sensitive.
Yeah,
to think about.
I see.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually, and touches a point which I think is one of the limits at the moment, at least the one we have seen with some operators. So managing so many tailored contents, especially on the LED displays, like pictograms and so on. which sometimes oblige us as manufacturers to find workarounds or solutions
Well, yes,
software-wise
absolutely.
to do it.
Some of the moves that people are having to make are insane.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we have taken an example. What pushed us in this direction was taking an example from a Scandinavian company called Westtraffic, who had a proof of concept of that involved a Raspberry Pi driving about 3 different manufacturers' LED displays from the same data set. And also there's some insights that we got from looking at Artig's work, especially in relation to the question of what a display is being used for, if you like, which is really quite important. So at the moment, from what I've seen, I may not have got the latest version, Tim, but I think I have, a device is categorized as mostly from a sort of roadside display point of view, whether it's displaying the arrival time on its own or the arrival and departure and all that kind of thing. That prompted me to think, well, this is surely relevant to onboard displays as well, because if you've got a whole scattering of different displays that happen to be installed on your vehicle, what you're really interested in is, well, should I just be showing the destination here, or should I be showing next stop and so on?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So we do need to wrap it up because we've been going, and I'm sure we could go more. There is more work going on at the moment in Artig on the display protocol. So there'll be more coming out on that soon. Thank you very much, David, for your presentation and your input. Thank you all for attending. I hope you found it useful. We've got a few events coming up that you may be interested in. A classic look at why is what's on my phone different to what's on the display. That will be quite an interesting session. And if we leap forward to Halloween, we'll have a look at ghost buses and phantom buses and all ghoulish type of buses and why they occur. There will be a number of other events in between. Those are the ones that are in the diary, though, and hope you find them useful. Thank you again for your time, David. Thank you, everybody else, for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching this Artig webinar. To find out more about Artig and our work, then please visit our website at rtig.org.uk. Thank you.